time to focus. Selamat siang kawan-kawan, sebelum kita mulai, izinkan kami menyampaikan beberapa peraturan. Kami mohon peserta mematikan mikrofon selama program berlangsung, kecuali saat diminta untuk berbicara. Ini akan membantu meminimalkan suara latar belakang dan memudahkan semua peserta untuk tetap fokus. Secondly, there are interpretations available for English and Bahasa Indonesia. Kindly press the globe icon found at the bottom of your screen and move to your preferred channel. For those who need English, please move to the English channel. Kami menyediakan terjemahan dalam bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. Untuk mendengarkan dalam bahasa Indonesia, silakan klik icon globe atau bola dunia yang terdapat di bagian bawah layar dan pilih saluran bahasa Indonesia. Thirdly, if you have any questions during the discussion, feel free to type them in the chat box at any time. We'll have time for a Q&A session later on. Jika Anda memiliki pertanyaan selama diskusi, silakan kirim pertanyaan Anda di kolom chat atau di chat box kapan saja. Pertanyaan Anda akan dibahas pada sesi tanya jawab nanti. And lastly, please note that this webinar is being recorded. Terakhir, harap diperhatikan bahwa kami merekam webinar ini. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us today in this important and timely discussion. My name is Veron. I'm a secretariat member of People Over Profit, and I'll be your MC for today. A little bit about People Over Profit. We are a workers-led global campaign platform that unites workers and toiling peoples across the globe to fight against free trade agreements and other neoliberal policies, fight against corporate plunder, and demand to put people over profit. Thank you all for coming to this webinar organized by us, People Over Profit, together with Resist US-led War Asia Pacific, ILPS Malaysia, and All Workers United, or AWU. Resist US-led War is a campaign platform of anti-war and pro-peace organizations, individuals, and movements to build solidarity among the peoples of the world to fight back against war and dismantle the war machine. ILPS Malaysia is a national chapter of the International League of People's Struggle in Malaysia. It advocates for the rights of workers, migrants, and indigenous peoples, and coordinates grassroots movements against imperialism in the country. And last but not the least, All Workers United is a new global platform for cooperation and solidarity among workers' organizations, associations, and labor unions. All Workers United, or AWU, aims to unite the struggles of workers, unionists, women, and migrants from both the global north and the global south. Its core mission is to coordinate the collective power of workers to hold capital and governments accountable for the widespread poverty, destitution, and exploitation faced by working people and toilers worldwide. AWU is built on the foundational principle, all workers unite. We have our websites and social media accounts up here. Please check us out so as to not miss any upcoming events. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. We would also like to encourage you to type in the chat box which organizations and countries you're from. And if you're having a watch party, please do let us know how many of you are there. Or just say hi in the chat box down below. So since late February, working people across the world have witnessed the rapid escalation of the US-led war on Iran, which has now expanded into a wider regional conflict. Launched on February 28th through coordinated US-Israeli strikes, the war has already claimed thousands of lives and displaced millions, while drawing in multiple countries across West Asia. Over 1 month in, its consequences are no longer distant. From rising fuel costs to increasing prices of basic goods, working people are already feeling the impact of a war they did not start. Following US and Israeli attacks on Iran, the Strait of Hormuz has effectively been brought to a halt. The US-Israel attacks on Iran immediately destabilized global energy markets, sending oil prices soaring past $100 per barrel and deepening the crisis of the global economy. The disruptions extends far beyond oil, with around 90% of global trade moving by sea. Any shock to major maritime routes quickly ripple through supply chains, driving up transport costs and, consequently, every other commodity. These price hikes will inevitably reach every working people across the world. The economic shock is rippling through industries that sustain everyday life. Gas-dependent fertilizers and petrochemicals production are pushing up prices for food and basic goods, while energy-intensive sectors from textiles and mining to glass and semiconductors face rising costs amid supply disruptions. Even the hospitality sector is hit as restaurants and kitchens reliant on LPG from West Asia struggle to cope. Aside from the economic impact, politically, this ongoing war exposes the complicity of the Southeast Asian leaders in advancing US militarism in West Asia and even in Southeast Asia itself. From Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto aligning himself with US-led initiatives such as Trump's so-called Board of Peace, to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., further opening the country as a strategic hub for US military presence in the Asia Pacific, despite glaring evidence of devastation such wars brings. These governments continue to tie their nations to the interest of imperialist war. In doing so, they not only legitimize aggression abroad, but also entrench foreign military influence within their own territories at the expense of national sovereignty and the welfare of their own people. The people of Southeast Asia, however, have been far from silent. In the face of these escalating atrocities, across the regions, protests and actions are emerging, demanding an end to imperialist wars and rejecting the role of their governments in enabling them. At the same time, working people are raising urgent demands to ease the growing economic burden they are being forced to carry. These mobilizations reflect a growing recognition that the fight against war is inseparable from the struggle for political and economic justice at home. So, to discuss further the economic and political impact of the ongoing US-led war in West Asia on the Southeast Asian people, especially the workers and toilers, we have Noel, Colina, secretariat member of Resist US-led War Movement in Asia and the Pacific Campaign. So, Noel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Veron. Again, thank you for ILPS Malaysia for the invite to this important webinar. So we all know there's a ceasefire now. No? I saw in the news that the Iranian delegation, the US delegation is now assembling in Pakistan. Islamabad is in a lockdown, no? Because of the ceasefire. And it was announced a ceasefire, I think April 7, if I'm correct. No? And during that time, when I think the timing was nice. No, I was watching the stock market, and then when the ceasefire was announced, Brent crude was trading at around $105 per barrel. And when the ceasefire was announced, immediately Brent crude price went down by 15%. So it was around 95, no? Trading at around 95. But then I checked the news again today. It's back to 100, close to 100, 98, 99. So despite the ceasefire, price of oil still is very high. But then there was immediate reaction, no, by the market on the price of oil. So when war started, when the US and Israel started attacking Iran at the end of February, prices of oil immediately went up. And the effect was immediate to most of the workers in Southeast Asia. There was a news item, for example, this was around April 7, no? Laos had around 170% increase in the price of diesel. These are pump prices. Vietnam, 141% increase. Burma and Philippines, around 128% increase. And Cambodia had around 119% increase in the price of diesel. Maybe in Malaysia and Indonesia, it's not that high since you have oil. But those countries I mentioned have very limited oil stocks and as well as oil supply. and most of them they buy from West Asia, no? And from other countries. So that was the immediate impact to many of the countries in Southeast Asia, and that reflected that price increase in oil reflected in prices of fuel at the pump price. So now you have, especially those who engage themselves in like in the platform economy, there are Gojek, Grab drivers. They have to pay now higher price of oil, no, and that ate a lot of their income. I think there will be some reactors later coming from the Philippines, and they would and explain further how it really disrupted the livelihood of many of the transport workers. But it's not just the transport workers impacted by the price of oil, because LPG, or liquefied petroleum gas, is also being used by households, small restaurants. And again, the price increase was more than 100%. So this was the immediate impact, this price increase in oil, as well as its inflationary effect to the rest of the basic goods and services. One thing that complicates or further inflates the prices that we are feeling right now is many of the countries that we are at in Southeast Asia have what we call consumption taxes. In Indonesia, you call it PPN, Pajak Pertambahan Nilai. I hope I pronounced it correctly. No? It's a value-added tax. It's around 12%. In Philippines, you have value-added tax around 12%. In Thailand, you have value-added tax around 7%. So, on top of the existing price increase in oil from the oil companies, there's another layer of price increase, which comes from consumption taxes, or specifically excise tax on oil. There was a news report coming from that, the Philippine government, from the start of the war till now, was able to collect around 785 million US dollars from excise tax on oil. So that's 785 million just in this few months. I mean, few weeks, no, of having the price of oil going up, because excise tax or consumption tax are percentage. So the higher the price, the higher the tax in absolute terms. So imagine that amount of collection by governments. It could be good also for our brothers and sisters here from Indonesia, from Malaysia, to observe that and explore that information. How much did your governments earn from the price increase in oil through the excise tax and oil tax? So, in short, in times of crisis, the workers are the first to suffer. But also, in times of crisis, there is someone or a group of people who benefit, who makes money from the crisis. And one of the main group to earn from the U.S. attack on Iran are first the defense companies. Last year already, 2025, there were already observations that the biggest growth in the numbers of billionaires were coming from the U.S. And now, with this war, there will definitely be more, more profit from this war. Imagine this: in the first 6 days of the war against Iran by the U.S., 11.3 billion was already spent. Now, around close to 50 billion have been spent by the US and Israel on attacking Iran. One Tomahawk missile cost around 2.2 million US dollars. No? And they have launched around 850 plus missiles against Iran. So you just multiply 2.2 times 800. And of course, these missiles are not free. So what happens would be once they are spent, US government have to buy new ones in order to replace them. And of course, who will be making those missiles? Raytheon, Boeing, all of those big defense companies. So in this crisis that we are facing, it is the defense companies, the war companies who will definitely benefit from this. For every missile drop, remember the Minab, what happened in Minab, 165 girls were murdered, no? By the US when they attacked that school. So death is suffered by many of us, but then profit for some. And among them would be these defense companies. But that's not the only one benefiting from the war. Please observe Trump every time he makes an announcement. Usually announcements come, in relation to war or anything, even for tariffs. No, if you observe since 2024, Trump would announce early in the trading week, probably around Sunday or Monday. So during the trading week, it will have impact on the financial markets. Like what I said, no, it was announced, and then immediately Brent crude went down. So Trump would announce things, and those announcements would have impact on the financial market. And that volatility in the financial markets, they can still earn from that. There was a report from the Financial Times that 2 days before the attack on Iran, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, or what did you call it? The Secretary of War of the US, his stockbroker bought defense stocks 2 days before the war. So when the war against Iran started, defense stocks, of course, went up. It went up. So someone, again, won in betting in the financial market. So I would suggest everyone to observe the financial market in these times of crisis. It's important to observe the general ongoings, no, of the war and defense companies. But let us not forget that in the stock market, in the financial market, just a few seconds you can earn millions, billions. There are reports, no, before Trump announced tariffs in 2024, that there was some insider information that he will announce tariffs, and then he and his friends, no, already made money. Some 200 million, another 100 million, just for shorting the market, playing the market. So financial markets is an important indicator of who is winning, who is benefiting. We all know we are losing. We are losing our jobs, we are losing our income in this war. But who is winning? Who is profiting from this war? Watch the financial markets. And that's something that is important for us to do. So on that point, I would I would pause my presentation, and let's open the floor for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Noel. Yeah, that's a really good point. on the one hand, we know of the consequences that the war brings on the people. Nothing but bad, nothing but violence and atrocities. But also on the other side of it, it's there must be a group of people, as you said, Noel, there must be a group of people who benefit. So who are those people? And those are the people we need to keep an eye out for, right? Those are the war or defense, quote unquote, defense companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, but also the people trading on war, no? It's the imperialists, the policymakers. And what kind of policies are they making? It's a violent policy, it's an anti-people policy, and they're making money out of it and out of the brutality. So yeah, that's a really good and really sharp analysis. Thank you so much, Noel. Without further ado, then, I'll open up the floor to our reactors. And we have reactors from the various countries in Southeast Asia right now. We have from Singapore, we have from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. But before that, I would like to remind everyone that we encourage you to send your questions in the chat box. We'll read as many of them as possible in the Q&A session later, and I think we'll have quite a bit of time later. So please ask away or share away. And yeah, so we're lucky to have with us today organizers from Southeast Asia, from the different Southeast Asian countries, to give their reaction to Noel's presentation and make connections to the economic and political impact of the war in their respective countries, and to share a little bit how the people are resisting. So first up, we will hear from Zul Othman, or Zero, from People's Art Initiative in Singapore. Zul is an urban visual artist, educator, with a career spanning more than 2 decades. Zul's artistic practice comprises multidisciplinary work, curation, and organizing with roots in graffiti, street art, urban visual culture, while delving into social investigations on minority identities and subcultures and grassroots activation. Zul is also a founding member of PI, or People's Artists Initiative. So go ahead, Zul.
Hi everyone, thank you. It's an honor to be part of this. It's really humbling, especially coming from Singapore, to be amongst all the comrades here. We are a very, very small country, as you all know, one of the smallest in Southeast Asia. But we are also, an important, geopolitical player. I think in the furthering of Western imperial doctrines, policies, and a lot of things like that. Singapore being one of the smallest, in fact, in Southeast Asia, when the war started, the bombing started by US and Israel, it was very surprising, that we are not immediately impacted, as how when I look around and I see the news and I watch the news, like how Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines have been impacted, and I did my own research, and we are one of the third largest exporter of refined oil in the world. So we have a stockpile of up to, I think the latest data, I think in early 2006, January 2006, we have a stockpile of up to 2.5 million barrels of refined petroleum, which includes LNG, liquefied natural gas, that we export. I mean, the fact that even in the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, a lot of countries like Cambodia, Laos, and even Australia are kind of still negotiating with Singapore to buy oil products from Singapore. I think it's very, very, in one hand, it's surprising. On the other hand, I don't find it surprising at all, even though we do not have natural oil and gas fields, but I think we have one of the largest stockpiles in this region, I think, not the world, as we have, the Jurong Island portion of Singapore, which is in the southwestern islands, have been combined, reclaimed to be a bigger island that part of it has been leased out to Shell. And all the southern islands that used to be inhabited by indigenous orang laut in Singapore, that got evicted latest in the 90s, are all now currently dedicated to oil refineries, Bukom, Southern Islands, Jurong Islands. And on a personal basis, as a working person, as a cultural worker, how has it impacted, Singaporeans? The price of oil has definitely gone up, but generally in Singapore, the price of oil, petrol, and at the pumps have always been high. It hasn't gone up that much, but it's quite significant. Geographically, a lot of Singaporeans who drive would actually drive up to Malaysia to pump their, petrol. And for me, I don't personally drive, but there has recently the tariffs for power for electricity has gone up 2.1% on top of the 9% GST goods service tax that we pay for everything that we buy, we purchase for service for goods like rice, oil, vegetable, and there's also been a discussion, or there's been an announcement that food produce will be higher because of the rising cost of fertilizers that is impacted because of the crisis now, the war that's led by US and Israel. On a personal basis, there are family members of mine who actually are private hire drivers, and their income has been significantly impacted by that, by the rise of the cost of oil. And again, like it's like was said by Comrade Noel before, it impacts in fact, everyone, the people, and I think on the policy level, recently there's been a lot of debate online. I think there's been a lot of criticisms from Malaysian politicians as well about Singapore's stance on not negotiating with Iran for passage through the Straits of Hormuz. The reasons given that they will not negotiate by principles of international law, which I find to be hypocritical, because when there's the whole tariff war that's been imposed by Trump and the US for the past almost a year, Singapore's in the front when it comes to negotiation of like tariffs and everything, even though by principle under international law the tariffs are illegal. I think even the Supreme Court in the US has kind of like said that that those tariffs are illegal. And in the larger scale of things in the international front, whatever's happening in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Venezuela, by principle of international law, those are all illegal actions. But somehow or other, when it comes to negotiating with Iran, Singapore uses moral principles, international law principles, which has not been done, exacted with other things that are happening globally. I think Singapore benefits a lot in its position, as a financial capital of Asia now. I think we have almost surpassed places like Hong Kong. A lot of the international banks are here, a lot of the monetary international banks that trade, that benefit from whatever conflicts that goes on globally are actually based in Singapore. And yeah, I think pretty much like, it has affected a lot of things. People are not spending as much. Grab has, I think that private hiring companies have increased, just added a surcharge of like up to 90 cents for every Grab ride or every private hire booking, under the pretext of helping drivers when actually drivers are asking for more. In fact, like rent, to lower down rent or to mitigate rental of vehicles. Recently, I've just received a message from the school portal, indicating that school transport drivers, are going through, there's going to be a surcharge for school public bus transport, because every month their cost for public transportation for schools runs up to like 100,000 for just diesel alone. And a lot of the bus drivers, private bus drivers for schools and like workers are not able to kind of like meet, the cost or to mitigate the costs when it comes to all these rising costs. Yeah, on the surface, Singapore, with no natural resources, we import everything, and I think, it's scary, especially being an artist. I do not have a regular wage. All my work is dependent on like project-based exhibitions, teaching, and when less people are spending, for certain needs or certain things that are seen as, excess, it also affects, on my end as an artist, the kind of work that I get, and it has been quite significant ever since the start of the year. My income level has dropped, and there's always a sort of like anxiety, especially when you're a sole breadwinner and you have kids and you have to make ends meet, you have to pay rent for a studio, you have to travel for work, even if it's on public transport, you still feel the significant rise, in the cost, the rise in the cost of food, the rise in the cost of like basic necessities. And recently the Singapore government rolled out assistance packages. We have these things called the CDC voucher, the community voucher. Is to mitigate inflation, and they just topped up another $1 billion, and they're going to push it from June. Now it's going to pushing it towards like April or May, so that we'll get those vouchers earlier. So they topped up $200 from a $300 voucher. So with the CDC vouchers, you can buy, you can buy groceries and whatnot. But I think the most immediate impact on that is the 9% GST, the goods services tax. Last year when they gave like $300 CDC voucher for groceries, it lasted me probably about maybe 6-7 trips to the supermarket. But this year alone, it only lasted about 3-4 trips. So the significant in the inflation is quite significant, and I don't think the assistance packages are really mitigating, especially disparity in income, because a person who earns $10,000 will pay 9% on the same packet of rice as compared to a person earning like $2,000 who's paying 9% on the same packet of rice. I think it's a very unfair and unequitable tax that hits all Singaporeans, regardless of whether your wage is high or your wage is low. I think that's the impact that I felt on a personal basis, and I work day to day, project by project basis, and I see the things around me happening. I see the general consensus of Singaporeans that they are quite anxious about what's going on. But Singapore being Singapore, there's always this divide, that we shouldn't take sides. We should be neutral. I think honestly, if you do not take sides, you're just taking the sides of the oppressors, of the powers that are, And I think the sharpening contradictions, there are a lot of things that we cannot deny anymore, but somehow I see a lot of Singaporeans who actually kind of like live in their own bubble, that we're going to be okay. I was just saying it like months ago before the Americans started and the Israel started bombing Iran. I said, how can we be okay if there's war, long sustained war in the Middle East, all your fancy Tesla, all your fancy vehicles are not going to move. All your Mercedes AMGs and your Beamers are all not going to move in like 2 days, right? I think for now, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm really, taking it off from my own perspective, my own experience as a working person, cultural worker in Singapore, and looking at general consensus of how we live our daily life. The vouchers are not, honestly, I have a question here from Laurie. Okay, is it enough to mitigate the impact of war? I don't think so. Because the policies have not changed. Recently, people have been asking for like a removal of tax surcharge for fuel, and the Singapore government says that we do not, deal with this kind of surcharge. We do not want to remove all the surcharge because it's seen as a blunt tool and it won't help Singapore in the long term. I think it will help the government in the long term if in terms of profits, to maintain the tax surcharge on fuel, but to the people as well. It's always like a chicken and egg thing. Something happens and the Singaporean government gives you a minimal has a minimal response by dumping vouchers to Singaporeans. And I think that is quite tough in that sense. If there's any questions, I'm
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zul. Maybe we can take a look at the questions later on during the Q&A.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
Thank you so much. Do you have any additions to your presentation?
I think I would like to hear more from our comrades from Indonesia, Philippines. It's always good to see the perspective of the bigger countries. Even though we have a lot of influence here in Singapore. I think being a proxy of like US imperialism and Western imperialism, we benefit from almost a lot of things that's being enacted on like developing countries like the Philippines, like Bangladesh, where we have cheap labor. I think it's in our interest to keep a lot of countries around us, continuously poor and corrupt, so that we can benefit from cheap labor. And I've always felt that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you so much, Zul. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's also, what you said is really true in that, Singapore is one of the more well-off countries, now one of the more well-off economies in Southeast Asia. But even then, Singapore and its workers, the people and the workers are also hit, given the reliance on imports, but also there's inflation, there's also goods and service taxes, as you said previously. It shows that the government is not on the side of the people and that nobody really is spared from the impacts of this war. Thank you so much, Zul, and answering to your wish earlier to hear more from the other countries. We have next up Saiful Wathoni, General Secretary of AGRA Indonesia. He has been active in the peasants movement since 2011, when he helped build the peasant movement in West Nusa Tenggara, or NTB. He then joined AGRA and headed the chapter organizing committee of AGRA West Nusa Tenggara in 2014. He has been active in the organizing of Mandalika movement against land grabbing, of the peasants movement in Gunung Rinjani National Park area, as well as the organizing of peasants movement in various villages, sub-districts, and regencies in West Nusa Tenggara since 2011. Since 2023, he became the General Secretary of AGRA Indonesia National Leadership. So without further ado, Bung Tony, silakan.
Okay, thank you, Veron, for your very interesting introduction of me. Okay, everyone, thank you for this opportunity to me to be one of the reactor of our main speakers of his presentations. I think what Noel has presented to us is very clear and very comprehensive for us to brought us to more higher knowledge about this war, about how this imperialism war was impacted to every country, not only in the Western Asia that where the war has been held, but also in all of the country, including in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. For continuing my reactions, I think I need to switch my language to Bahasa for more fluently. And I will start my reactions. Terima kasih kawan-kawan sekalian
Thank you
atas
so
kesempatan
much,
ini.
friends. for this
Pertama, mungkin
opportunity.
saya ingin memberikan satu pengantar
First, I
atas
would like to
untuk agar lebih memahami tentang bagaimana
explain
kemudian perang yang sekarang
about
dipimpin oleh imperialisme Amerika.
about the war that is now that is led by U.S. imperialists affect the situation of Indonesian and also the policy taken by Prabowo Gibran regime. First, we understand that imperialism facing crisis since 2008, since the Supreme Mortgage crisis. This crisis has forced imperialism to further intensify its operation of colonial and semi-colonial countries, forcing all ruling regime throughout the country to become its puppet, forcing all natural resources and economic output to flow into its cover, turning the population into readily available labor force and strengthening and expanding its military bases and influence to threaten the compliance of all existing countries. Increasing rivalry between imperialist countries, although it has not yet succeeded in displacing the US. Where now China and Russia, currently two most prominent rival countries. This rivalry has forced US imperialism to rack its brain to ensure its hegemony and ensure all countries remain submissive and obedient to it, from threatening tariffs, waging proxy wars, to threatening war and even waging and leading direct wars of aggression, as has been the case with Palestine, Venezuela, and Iran. Not only that, the other, to intensify the to exploit the working class, through various, okay. The burden of the crisis is being shared with the working class and the people of underdeveloped countries through unfair agreements and cooperation, debt, investment, and war, which are path imperialism has taken out of the crisis. It increased their access to natural resources. Before we understand what is the impact of the crisis, war crisis to Indonesia, we need to understand Indonesia as a country, a wealthy country with natural resources that has led many expeditionary nations to anchor their ships for hundreds of years, some coming solely to trade, others to extract raw materials, and even settle to colonials. Portugal, England, Spain, Netherlands, and Japan are names of countries with historical link to these expeditions and colonization. Geographically, Indonesia lies on a strategic trade route encompassing a cluster of millions of islands with 5 prominent major islands, Kalimantan, Sumatra, Sulawesi, Java, and Papua. The majority of its population is spread across rural areas, working as small-scale farmers, while others migrated to cities as laborers in factories. Since the end of World War II, the imperial system has been under the sole control of the United States. Indonesia remains a priority colony in Southeast Asia. the role of landlords in monopolizing land and natural resources has been strengthened as the social basis of imperialism, and many businessmen and imperialist agents also act as landlords. This relationship has led all levels of government of Indonesia to become bureaucratic capitalists. The abundant natural resources, long colonial history, strategic geographic location, and the psychopathic nature of the regime have also led Donald Trump to maintain Indonesia as a key country in Southeast Asia to be consolidated to support all of its devious and fascist policies, and of course, to help the U.S. imperialists navigate their increasingly acute and parasitic crisis. Playing the role of puppet regime, Prabowo has clearly shifted Indonesia's foreign policy from non-aligned, independent, and active policy to a policy of siding with U.S. imperialism and its allies. On numerous occasions, he has firmly called for respect and security for Israel, a statement that implies support for Israel, a perpetrator of war crimes and genocide against the Palestinian people and nation. The pinnacle of Prabowo's betrayal of the Indonesian people and the Constitution, which mandates respect for and struggle for the independence of all nations, in his involvement in the Board of Peace. The board, established by Donald Trump, requires contribution of 17 trillion rupiah to support plans for genocide against the Palestinian people and nation, as well as American real estate development under the guise of Palestinian reconstruction. This policy has sparked strong opposition and criticism among the Indonesian people, but as a puppet regime, Prabowo has remained unmoved and has instead accused the popular population movement of being a foreign stooge that must be suppressed to protect his master interests. For his involvement in the BOP, Prabowo was then appointed by Donald Trump as deputy commander of the International Stabilization Force and promised to send 8,000 Indonesian National Armed Forces to Gaza, where 3 military officers of Indonesia were reportedly killed in an attack in Lebanon a few days ago. Prabowo's involvement in the BOP and the ISF appears to be part of negotiations over the tariff threat that Trump has been urging since 2025. The subsequent negotiation resulted in a highly insulting agreement for the Indonesian people. The agreement on reciprocal trade. Through this agreement, it was agreed that Indonesia would be subject to a 19% tariff on export to the United States and a 0% tariff on imported goods from the U.S. Furthermore, the zero tariff export tariff on several commodities such as palm oil, cocoa, and coal was developed by companies owned by imperialists or their partners. This agreement also resulted in Indonesia being obliged to export various overproduced goods owned by imperialists, from technological goods to agricultural products such as soybean and rice. Products actually produced by the Indonesian people and contrary to Prabowo's promise on food self-sufficiency since the beginning of his administration. And open up American access to critical mineral mining in Indonesia. Not only that, Prabowo continued to promote Indonesia to other imperialist countries, such as his visit to Japan on March 30, where the visit produced some agreement on politics, economy, investment, and security that we see as part of how to strengthen the hegemony of US in Southeast Asia. If I'm not wrong, the investment promise of Japan is 130 trillion. The agreement, including its in military training, like joint training and security training. For the Indonesian people, this war, led by the US imperialists, has certainly increased the oppression faced by the Indonesian people across various classes and sectors. Workers' wages have indeed increased, albeit not significantly. However, this increase coincides with plans to relocate various factories from areas with high minimum wage rates to areas with lower minimum wage rates, and with an increasingly widespread rate of layoff. In many factories, labor contracts have become increasingly So indeed, the wages have increased, but it's not significant. And this coincide with plans to relocate various factories from areas with high minimum wage rates to areas with lower minimum wage. And there's also increasingly widespread rate of layoff. There are also some wage scheme that we found. Like some workers work without contract with the scheme of no work, no pay. And in large plantation owned by comprador bourgeoisie or even imperialists directly, forced labor practices are still widespread amidst a highly inadequate work system. We found the workers siluman, like ghost workers that we heard a lot to say about workers in the plantation sectors. In rural areas, land monopolies and land grabbing are increasingly widespread, as are evictions of homes and villages from rural to urban areas. During the Prabowo administration, at least 4.9 million hectares of private land have been seized under the name of the Forest Area Control Task Force. Most of this confiscated land has been handed over to AGRA Palma, a state-owned enterprise managed by the military. 35,000 hectares of the targeted 140,000 hectares of private land have been seized by the Land Bank Agency, which is then reoriented to support the Nantara. 4 million hectares of people's land have been seized for the food estate project, the largest of which is in Merauke, Papua, with 2 million hectares given to the John Lynn Group. The figures for land monopolies and seizures increasingly complement the previous figures for land monopolies, which have reached more than 70% of the total land area of Indonesia, which is divided for the establishment of national parks, covering an area of 16 million hectare, which is divided into 57 national park units, 125 million hectares of forest, which is institutionalized under the Forest Management Unit. 2 million hectare of forest under the control of Perhutani, 16.8 million hectare of palm oil plantations, 1 million hectare of nickel mining concession from 9.1 million concession, 4,200 IUPs for mineral and coal mining. The worsening wage and rising rates of layoff as well as the increasing rate of so they are also facing criminalization. The increased number of criminalizations since August 2025, there are thousands of activists arrested in Indonesia. And until now, it still continued to happen. And at least now 700 activists were in court hearing right now. Aside from that, farmers also facing criminalization since last 9 March. There's still happening evictions to farmers in Padang Halabat, North Sumatra, and 2 of them still missing. And the other one faced violence and abuse. And it's still happening in Padang Halaban, North Sumatra right now. And also some few days ago, there are also some leaders of farmers organization in Aceh. There's also arrested, but also then released because of the push from the people. In the city, there's a situation of panic buying. There's a very long queue in pump station and rarity of gas. So now there's like the increased price of gas in some areas from 80,000 to 27,000. The cost of production of farmers is also increased, while the market price for their production is getting lower. And while their basic necessities cost is also increasing. And their products price is very volatile. I would like to convey our urgent task, that is strengthen public education and propaganda effort as a source of objective knowledge and information amidst the uncertainty of information circulating through various platforms. I think it's very important for webinars like this as part of providing objective information to the peoples. The second is to build and expand our organizations as tools for the people's genuine struggle, characterized by anti-imperialist, anti-feudal, and anti-bureaucratic capitalism, and build and expand solidarity across sectors and countries, And the last one is to work with the people to achieve every minimum demand of the people. That's all. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if it took too long time.
Agreement of reciprocal trade that only benefits the US and not Indonesia, with unequal tariffs and the forcing of getting US overproduction, importing US overproduction to Indonesia, as well as opening free access to the resources in Indonesia to foreign investors. Thank you so much, Tony, for your addition. Very sharp. And as our third speaker, we will hear from Ayman Hareez of Sekolah Merdeka in Malaysia, who has been dedicated to anti-imperialist organizing and liberatory education for all. So Ayman, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Noel for the earlier presentation. It was very clear, insightful, and I think very, very it educated me a lot about how to like see these things from an international perspective. And again, also I'd like to thank Zol from Singapore and also Bung Tony dari Indonesia. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. I think it really, again, very much educated about the situation and the experiences happening in other countries. Now, I know I'm supposed to speak for 7 minutes. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to fill up the 7 minutes because I feel like I'm a bit underqualified compared to the rest of the people here in terms of like what kind of organizing everyone's doing. But I'll try my best to share what's been happening in Malaysia, especially in relation to the the war America and Israel has incited upon Iran. Now, where do I begin? I think I do want to like jump off first from what Noel mentioned about how the ones who profit most from this are the defense companies internationally. And I think from this, I'd like to draw attention to Malaysia's complicity, specifically in terms of military, the military industrial complex. Now, one big issue that's currently being highlighted, especially by anti-imperialist organizers in Malaysia, is the fact that Malaysia will be hosting I think it's seventh or something NatSec. So it's called the National Security Conference, where a bunch of companies will be from around the world, defense companies that design weapons that work on military technology, surveillance technology. These companies will be coming to Malaysia, most of them from the West. In fact, I think 12 of them, if we have this information online, 12 of them are actually linked to the IDF, the Israel, whether they trade with Israel or whether they sell to Israel. These are UK and American companies that are linked to the genocidal Zionist settler entity. And these companies will be coming here to display their weapons, to share their research, and to basically advertise. NatSec itself is a conference where a bunch of countries, a bunch of governments and companies and high-ranking army people will be coming, and that's where they congregate, and then they trade info, they trade all this stuff, and they also sign trades and contracts. So as recent as 2 years ago, for example, the Malaysian's Internal Affairs Ministry has actually signed 14 contracts, totaling up to 2.156 billion ringgit. That's about $500,000 USD in deals in terms in buying weapons from these companies, specifically from the US and the UK. And these are the same weapons that are used by our national military, and also the same weapons that are supplied to the police, the Royal Malaysian Police, which are used in, the repression of civil activists and societies. Now, the reason I wanted to highlight this is the fact that Malaysia um, likes to prop itself up as like, oh, anti-Israel, right? Especially as a Muslim majority country, that is the prevailing sentiment amongst the general people. But when we talk about the state itself, especially the history of the state, Malaysia, despite having the anti-Israel and even sometimes anti-imperialist rhetoric, it has maintained very good relations with the imperialist nations, and indirectly, of course, um, it has really not really done anything for what's happening in Palestine. So even actually before the fourth Prime Minister Mahathir, there was a lot of efforts on the part of the government. They wanted to they wanted to normalize relations with Israel, right? That's what they wanted to do, because they wanted to open up an embassy here, and they also wanted to open up a U.S. military base in Malaysia. And this was something that was heavily opposed by the mass movement and ultimately failed to happen. But the reason that um, the Malaysian state was trying to do that was because, historically speaking, the reality of Malaysia was that we never really achieved proper independence or a genuine independence. Instead, we were given independence by the British, right? Power was handed over from the colonial rulers to the comprador elites, specifically the Malay aristocrats of our nation, and powers put in their hands, and they continued um, colonial rule in a new form, whereby white supremacy was replaced with Malay supremacy, which of course had a very specific class character, benefiting mostly the bourgeois, aristocratic, and even the monarchic classes. Now, sorry. Um, yeah, even up until today, we can besides NatSat, we can see as recent as last year, what happened was at the ASEAN Summit, right? The ASEAN Summit, which Malaysia hosted, we had a very warm welcome for Trump when he came here as a representative of the United States, and we saw how the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim, really treated him really well. Was even dancing with him, even took a car ride with him in private, like just the two of them. I think that was like against protocol. Oh no, sorry. He was invited, but that never happened. Sorry. But anyways, he was given such great treatment, and it led to the signing of, similar to Indonesia, we also had the signing of an ART. Now, the trade agreement that was signed, one of the things that people noticed, even amongst our people, was how imbalanced it was. In fact, there was this picture of the contents of the agreement itself. If you looked at it, on one end, benefits for Malaysia is just one single thing, right? It was one bullet point, and then on the other hand, for the US, there were like so many things that benefited the United States in that agreement. And all these things, a lot of people have, gone at length to talk about them. But what I like to highlight is the fact that one of the things that Malaysia agreed upon, and this is something that you can find in an analysis written by Fadia Nadwa and Farwasial, is that Malaysia has agreed to share the data that is compiled by the Central Bank of Malaysia, meaning that, we send information about our finances to the United States, allowing for them to easily surveil what we're doing. And this actually puts us in a compromising position, because Malaysia, like many other ASEAN states, likes to plead neutrality. But the moment that we are sharing, our financial activities, all this data that shouldn't really be easily accessed by a different country, it allows for the United States to easily detect when if we try to evade sanctions or certain patterns or certain impositions by the United States, allowing for them to essentially cause us to police ourselves and prevent us from actually being neutral, and instead aligning more with the financial policies, trade policies of the United States. Yeah. And that's on the topic of the trade agreement. In terms of like, the main issue right now going on, the Straits of Hormuz and the thing about the oil and all that stuff, Malaysia actually, when it comes to oil, we've always subsidized oil. The government has always subsidized oil as a way to enrich its own GLCs and all that kind of stuff. But the reaction so far hasn't been that bad, because honestly, recently, before even like the all-out war happening right now, Malaysian oil used to be subsidized like entirely. There was no limit to it, which is why, like Azul mentioned, there were Singaporeans who would drive up to Johor and like fill up their tanks and come back down because petrol here was so subsidized that it was so cheap for everyone. But essentially, what happened like late last year was that the government decided to introduce um quotas for the subsidies based on our identity card. So with that installed, the people started being aware that, oh, oil is actually expensive, and it did start making people realize that, oh, okay, now that we are putting a control on your oil, especially for e-hailing drivers like Grab drivers, Food Panda riders, and all these people, they're severely affected by it because they've always relied on low oil prices in order to, benefit a lot from their work as drivers. And with the current war that is happening, Malaysia has actually reduced the quota for each person. So it used to be, if I'm not mistaken, 300 liters per month. Now they've reduced it to 200 liters, and people are starting to like become more cognizant of it. But at the same time, I think Malaysia, similar to Singapore, we are a country that uh is quite comfortable compared to other nations in sea. So we are quite complacent about it. And so people aren't really like holding back yet, aren't really cutting on their spending. And I'm specifically talking about Malaysian citizens who have access to these kinds of privileges that are given by the state. Um, whilst at the same time, we are told by the Prime Minister that we should be able to sustain our current way of living at least for 2 months, while the government at the same time is also reminding us to start saving up, right? To start reducing our spending to become more frugal in order to prepare ourselves for what's coming. Which is a funny thing because the government hasn't really done anything beyond that other than cutting the quota of the subsidies. And in fact, we are not prepared. We are not prepared at all to face what's coming ahead. And I think that the worst part about it is that people don't realize that. And I think that's also a product of like this false consciousness that has been cultivated through, counterinsurgency methods that have started from the time of the British and continued by the Malay ruling class up until now. So the general reaction of the people today is, I think that they are not aware what's in store. And I think just observing that I'm not sure what's gonna, happen or how whether people will start moving, people will start actually doing something about it on the grassroots level. But um, yeah, I think that false consciousness is something that's really reflective of Malaysia's many, many decades of complacency, especially amongst the people, because we've never really had to um face not face me, sorry, face the reality of war and all this stuff that's happening far away from us. And I think it will be interesting to see how the current war, especially with Iran not backing down and refusing to give in unless it's like a meaningful ceasefire, right? Which I don't think is something that's going to be achieved anytime soon. With the active war ongoing, I think it will be interesting to see how that affects the consciousness of the Malaysian masses. And yeah, I think that's all from me for now. I think when people start asking questions later, I'll probably have something more to say. I'm sorry if I was just rambling on. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ayman. That's wonderful. Thank you. I think your presentation really highlighted, no, where the Malaysian government is, but where the people are maybe slowly becoming, with the government, really siding, like Indonesia, like Singapore, really siding with the US and Israel with their, as you say, NatSec conference, no, advertising weapons that they use on the people, while trying to maintain this facade of, being anti-Israel or neutrality, which hopefully that the people in the future are slowly realizing, right? And as Comrade Tony earlier said, it's a matter of educating and organizing the people to build the people power. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And last but not least, we have also Raymond Mong Palatino. Raymond is a Filipino writer, journalist, and activist. He's a former congressman of Kabataan Party List in the 14th and 15th Congress of the Philippines. He's currently the Secretary General of Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, or New Patriotic Alliance, also called BAYAN, a political center of national democratic alliances and people's organizations of various sectors in the Philippines. So, Raymond, if you're here, go ahead, please.
Thank you for the introduction and the invitation to be part of this panel. Thank you to our main speaker, Noel, and to our reactors who shared and tackled the impact of the oil crisis and the US-Israel aggression on Iran on their respective countries. So the Philippines is a net importer of oil. So we are directly affected by the disruption in the oil supply, the destruction of oil facilities, and the ongoing US-Israel attacks on Iran and West Asia. There are more than 2 million Filipino migrant workers in West Asia, both documented and undocumented workers. So there is the threat of displacement affecting our migrant workers. So one of the early criticism of our workers against our government is the lack of clarity or clear information about the steps that they have to do for their safety. There is inconsistency in the assistance provided by our embassies, consulates to our migrant workers. In fact, one official of our embassy in Bahrain was removed from his job because of the complaints of our migrant workers. It took some time for the government to arrange flights to rescue stranded Filipinos in West Asia. On a personal note, I have a sister who is based in Dubai. She was supposed to come here in the Philippines for a vacation because her daughter is the valedictorian in her class. And unfortunately, because of the uncertainty, she was not able to come home. So her situation mirrors the experience of so many migrant Filipinos who are directly affected by the war and crisis. So Noel mentioned about the impact on prices. I think we have also to mention there is collusion between the oil companies and governments in manipulating and oil prices. So for the oil companies, they are accused of exploiting the crisis to uh, increase oil prices, even if they have an inventory of oil that could last for 1 to 2 months. So the war is being exploited by these oil profiteering companies. So Noel mentioned who are the people who are benefiting among definitely the oil cartel is benefiting from the war. So as Noel also mentioned, there are taxes levied by the government on oil prices. So every increase in oil prices, the government is supposed to benefit from higher taxes. But why are we complaining? We are complaining because these taxes affect consumers, affect workers, and these revenues are not being enjoyed by our people because of massive systemic corruption in our bureaucracy. So the government has a windfall profit from higher revenues, but unfortunately, these higher funds are also being systematically plundered by our corrupt officials in the bureaucracy. That is why the government is reluctant to remove taxes, excise taxes on fuel products, and also the removal of VAT on oil and other basic goods and services. So as mentioned earlier, the Philippines is a net importer of oil. So we immediately felt the impact of the oil price shock through higher prices imposed by the oil cartel. So what the government did to assuage people's fears and to uh, calm down the situation is for the declaration of an energy emergency. So it was reported in global news that the Philippines is the first country to declare an energy emergency. So what did the government do during the energy emergency? So subsidies were given to affected sectors, but these subsidies proved to be inadequate, and they became tools for political patronage. A law was passed to give powers to the president to suspend the excise tax, but the president has yet to use this law to suspend the excise tax. So it was passed merely to it became a toothless tokenistic measure, a palliative or band-aid solution to the problem. And so because of the incompetence of the government, the indifference of the government to the plight of the poor, the refusal to remove taxes, the refusal to to increase fares so that our small transport operators can cope with rising prices. Several protests have been organized in the past few weeks. So two sets of transport strikes were held across the Philippines. Protest actions were also held by different people's organizations, including workers. And so what is the demand of the transport strike and the protest which BAYAN also organized? The first in our demand is for the ending of the war. We are condemning the US and Israel for the acts of aggression. We are demanding the government to take a stand to condemn the war. Bongbong Marcos was in the UN a few weeks ago, but he didn't use that global platform to condemn the war. Uh, and also related to this call for the ending of the war is for the Philippines not to be dragged in the endless wars of the US. So when US attacked Iran, Iran retaliated by firing missiles at US bases around it. So this is a reminder for the Philippines that currently we host 9 US bases, and there are US military facilities across the country. And in these facilities, there are US missiles systems. There are military drills being conducted. So our demand is the immediate dismantling of these US bases, the ending of the Balikatan military exercises, the expulsion of US troops, the removal of missile systems. We do not want to be dragged into the endless wars of the US. We do not want to be used as a launching pad to attack other nations, and we do not want to become a magnet of attacks from the rivals or enemies of the US. And then another demand of the transport strike and the protest is to provide subsidies to the affected sectors, uh, grant the demand of the workers for a living wage to increase the wages of our workers, remove excise tax on fuel products, remove VAT on oil and basic goods and services. We want the government to take control uh, to regulate oil prices. So another demand is the repeal of the oil deregulation law. So the Philippines is an example of the impact of a deregulated or privatized oil industry. For 30 years, we have deregulated the downstream oil industry. And because of the deregulated regime, the government is helpless, ineffective in controlling or regulating oil prices, even if there is clear evidence of oil profiteering from the oil companies. So our Senate President even suggested the repeal of this three-decade law. It is time to reverse oil deregulation because our experience showed that only corrupt officials, only the oil cartel will benefit from a deregulated and privatized industry. So the Philippines, aside from repealing the oil deregulation law, our next demand, a long-term demand, is to take control of the oil industry, a very sensitive industry. We want to nationalize the oil industry so that we will not be vulnerable to external attacks. We will not be vulnerable to global oil price shocks, and we will have a sense of control on how the oil industry will benefit Filipinos and not the cronies, oligarchs, and the oil cartel. And so I think my last point. So I think Noel also mentioned at the start of his discussion that there is ceasefire. There is ceasefire on paper, but there is no ceasefire on the ground. Attacks are continuing. There's no ceasefire in the speculation in the financial market. There's no ceasefire in the suffering of our people. So our response should be there should be no ceasefire in our resistance. We should continue to protest. So we are preparing for another round of transport strike in the next few days. We are preparing another series of localized, decentralized protests to reiterate our demands, primarily the ending of the war, to condemn the US, Israel for its war crimes and attacks on Iran. We are also preparing for the Labor Day on May 1 in solidarity with workers and also to join workers in their demand for higher wages and to condemn what the US is doing and its impact on workers, and also the demand to increase the wages of our workers. I think my last point is in all these crises, what is important is the solidarity of our people. So the government is helpless. So we are seeing also the initiative of our people to extend solidarity to affected workers and communities. But solidarity is not enough. Resistance should be stronger. And it is through our collective action that we can push back against anti-people policies. It is through our collective action that we can highlight uh, what war is doing, what financial speculation is doing, what oil profiteering is doing to our people. And also, this is an opportunity for us to remind our people that there is an alternative. The alternative to take control of our industry, the alternative for an independent foreign policy, and the alternative of defeating imperialism by condemning the US and also by making sure that our respective countries will not host US bases, will not allow the US to use our countries to attack other nations. So we may be far from Iran, but we are feeling the impact of what the US and Israel is doing in Iran. And it is through our solidarity and resistance that we can overcome and defeat imperialism. Thank you and a good day.
Thank you so much, Mong. Wow. Yeah, as you said, it's two sides of the same coin, no? On the one side, there's a collusion between the oil companies cartel profiting off of this oil price increase, the government with their excise tax, with their consumption tax. But on the other side of that same coin, no, there are protest actions by workers, transportation strikes happening currently in the Philippines, demanding for pro-people policies, demanding for nationalization of their oil industry. Really amazing and really inspiring. Thank you so much. Without taking any more time, I will open up the Q&A session to anyone who wants to ask anything. I think I saw a couple questions earlier in the chat box already. There was one that was for Zul, no? Singapore. Maybe Zul, if you can answer this. It's a question from Rosie. What are the experiences of migrant workers in places such as Singapore? How does that differ, or how is it similar from the average person? Thank you so much, Rosie, for your question. Yeah, go ahead, Zul.
Thank you, Rosie, for the question. I think in Singapore, there's different tiers of migrant workers. You have the expat communities who are obviously more privileged, as compared to the majority of migrant workers. We are a population of 7 million, but I think 5 million of us are like Singaporeans and PRs. So the high majority of like migrant workers. In fact, I think there's up to 200,000 overseas Filipino workers here working in different sectors, from domestic helpers to healthcare to retail. And I think in this instance, the impact, whatever Singaporean feels is impacted also on the migrant worker. I think if the wages are suppressed, how much money they can send back, remit back to their home countries is going to be lower. I think with a wage of $600, a migrant worker coming from South Asia, definitely spends more on like buying essential things like rice, food, and I think with the global impact of the war, economy in developing countries are definitely going to go down, and therefore, a lot of people in these developing countries will look towards Singapore. If I'm not going to find a job in my country, I'm going to go and try and look a job somewhere else. And now it's hard to go to Dubai because of what's happening in the Middle East. You look to places like Japan, Singapore, South Korea, and you try to come here. I think with the impact of the war, I think definitely like the agents that charge exorbitant prices on these migrant workers, to find a job elsewhere in another part of the world or in another part of Asia, will charge higher. They will include extra for basically just fuel surcharge, even though they might not even call it fuel surcharge. And most of the migrant workers who come here, the first year of their work is basically to pay off that debt that they have taken to be able to even find a job in these different countries. And I think that cost will be added on to them as well, to come to Singapore or like developed countries like Japan, even Malaysia now has a huge number of like migrant workers from Indonesia, from South Asia as well. And I think this will directly impact them because in their country themselves, they're unable to find work, cost is high, inflation is super high. And of course, they will look somewhere else. And then now with rising fuel taxes, opportunity costs, of course, like agencies, scalpers that are, in a sense, trafficking, or, benefiting on cheap laborers would add this cost to the laborer who's, attempting to just make a better life for their family because the country that they're in is unable to provide that sort of opportunities, and they have to come to like countries like Singapore, and the cost will definitely be put on them, to be able to even come here, apply for a job, go for an interview, be absorbed into the huge number of like labor, worker here, the numbers here, and then I think that's the direct impact on them as well. Here in Singapore, like I said, commodities, essential items like food, rice, vegetables, the inflation has already been affecting them, and it is going to affect them even more. Those who are coming and those who are already here. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zul. I think everywhere in the world, migrants are most of the time it's always bearing the brunt, no, of inflation,
Yes.
of crisis, basically. Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions from the chat here? I think the question earlier about vouchers, was it already answered, Zul?
I think that has yes, that has been answered. I think to expand on that, I think vouchers, are just short-term band-aids. It's a very populist policy. Oh, something happens, it's just throw them. And then I think if you calculate the amount of taxes that are taken through goods and services tax, the GST, I think we pay more in unseen taxes, even though Singapore, in terms of income tax, is quite low. But hidden taxes through other things like road tax, fuel surcharge tax, goods and services tax affect more people on a I think impacts more on a day-to-day basis than your yearly income tax, which is quite significantly low. But if I calculate the amount of tax that I pay on every single thing that I from a bus fare to a Grab ride to eating out or even like buying groceries, I think it's more than what I'm paying in terms of like income tax. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much. I'm seeing now more questions are coming in. There's one for Mong to Sir Palatino from Ian Pura. Given that the global oil and petrochemical industry is tied to the neoliberal petrodollar system, would a shift from fossil fuels like oil and coal to renewable and nuclear energy be feasible for us to do across Southeast Asia? Especially for a country like the Philippines that imports 98% of its oil and around 85% of its natural gas from the Middle East. The Philippine government is pushing to have nuclear energy here by the 2030s, and Vietnam has a deal with Russia to build new reactors. Before we get to your answer, Mong, I do also want to read Ian Pura's other question earlier to Noel. It has been answered in the chat, but maybe it would be nice for everyone to listen in. To Sir Noel, given how Iran was able to prepare its defense industry as a deterrent to the US and its allies, would it be a good thing for countries across Southeast Asia to build their own respective defense industries as a response? So far, those are the questions that we have. I'll bring it to Mong first. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the question. So yes, aside from taking control of the oil industry, another of our strategic demand, long-term demand, is to develop an economy that is less dependent on oil. So there should be a shift to sustainable and renewable sources of energy. We need to develop an economy that will have a mass transport system, that will harness our agricultural base so that we can have genuine national industrialization for a productive economy. But at the same time, we have to take note that there are an increasing number of renewable energy projects today in the Philippines. And in our monitoring and in the reports of our chapters, these so-called renewable energy projects are also causing the displacement of our people. For example, there are proposed windmill projects, but our fisher folk and farmers are complaining that these so-called windmill projects are leading to the destruction of their livelihoods, displacement from their communities. There are proposals for the establishment of solar panels, solar farms that will cover our lakes, that will destroy our farming communities. So it is not enough to call for a renewable source of energy. We have to take note about who is benefiting, who is sponsoring this so-called renewable energy project. So in the end, it should be the question is who will benefit from these projects. At the same time, it is the people who should take charge in the transition of our economies that is less dependent on oil, but that will genuinely pursue an economy that will benefit all.
Well said. Thank you so much, Mong. I'll give it over to you, Noel, to answer the second question.
Okay, so I made some points already in the chat box about would it be beneficial for countries to create their own defense industry or follow the pattern of the US. Of course, it is a sovereign right of every nation to defend itself. That is integral in every nation. You have to defend yourself when you're being attacked. No one can take that away from any nation. But if you, in this time, make your economy into a war economy, then your factories will be transformed into factories for death instead of factories for life. That happened in the USSR, I think, in where they converted many during the Cold War, many of their factories into production for the war. And it left a big rust belt in the industry. Because, of course, you cannot eat bullets. No? The more important thing for an economy is to provide the necessities that is required by the people to survive and to flourish. And that's, I think, that should be the main focus of any economy, is to provide food, the basic necessities, shelter, energy for its people. But if it becomes just for war, then again, we already know what happened. No? I already mentioned how Hitler transformed the German economy into a war economy, and that led to World War II, and so on. No? So defending our countries, our sovereignty is integral to our being a nation. But that does not mean that you should create your own military industry. And as a response, but what's happening right now is that is the direction of many countries. They will definitely build more robust defense system, and unfortunately, for the superpowers, the hegemons, they build industry not for defense; it's for offense, it's for aggression, it's for intervention. So it's very different for a country building its army to defend itself. But here, what we see, the imperial powers, they're building their weapons, their armies for aggression and intervention, and that should not be happening.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Are there any more questions in the group, in the chat box? We are a little bit over time. So if there is no other questions, okay. There's one more, and maybe there's time for just one more before we wrap up. There's a question from Max Santiago. For countries asserting sovereignty, and if Philippines gains genuine independence, would we consider nuclear weapons a deterrent to US imperialism as the Soviet under Stalin did? So yeah, I'll give this to maybe Noel, or if anyone wants to jump in from the reactors, go ahead.
Oh, again, as I mentioned, the framework is we have to defend ourselves. No? So we have that right as a nation. No one can take that away from us. Now, how nuclear weapons? Okay, so you build a nuclear weapon now, but that would mean, or the assumption is, everyone has zero nuke weapons. No? But at the moment, that's not the reality. Some countries are already ahead of us. No? I think Southeast Asia doesn't have nukes. No? And there are even policies in some countries that do not allow such development of nuclear weapons. But as a deterrent, in the past, they used that as a deterrent. But again, because the idea there was, it was, if you are attacked and you have both nuclear weapons, it's mutual annihilation. You know? That was the principle back during the Cold War. And if it's for defense, again, that no one can take that away from us, no? For defending ourselves. But as I mentioned earlier, the development of the military industrial, the development of war at the moment, or of weapons at the moment, for the big powers, it's for aggression. So we should follow that framework. No? Whether it's nuke or whatever, we have to defend ourselves, and that no one can take that away from us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noel. And I think with that last question, I can wrap it up a little bit, try to summarize what has been discussed in this webinar. I think it's clear that, as you said, Noel, not only these weapons and defense systems, but war in general right now, it is for profit. We are under no illusion that it's for otherwise, no? And who is profiting from war? And it's what, as Noel has said, it's the imperialists, the insider traders, the policymakers, the war companies, governments through their excise tax and consumption tax that has been brought up by Noel and Mong very sharply. And who are the victims? Who are experiencing the brunt, no? The bad part of war. It's everyone, all the people in the world. It's the workers, it's the peasants, as our reactors from Singapore, from Indonesia and Malaysia have talked about. It's also the migrants, no? The migrants in West Asia who are experiencing the consequences directly, immediately in front of their faces, but also the migrants in Southeast Asia, in the more well-off economies like Singapore, who are also experiencing the crisis, the worst of the crisis, no? So war in West Asia is not only it's not only close to Southeast Asia, not because of the consequences to the people, but also the complicity of our governments, as Comrade Ayman from Malaysia have talked about, no, with Malaysia hosting NATSEC conference, and in the Philippines with the Balikatan. Indonesia, we have also a Garuda Shield, and Singapore being used also as a launching pad for the US. So what we need to do is we need to build collective power, no? A people power through organizing, through educating, through solidarity, through collective action. And that's how we really resist the war, the imperialist wars that are for profit and not at all for the people. So thank you so much to all the organizers here, no, for not only coming here and sharing your insights and your experience, but also for doing the hard work day to day, every day, organizing the people and really building that power to fight against the war that is affecting all of us right now. Thank you so much to our reactors. Thank you so much to our speaker. Thank you to everyone who have come here today. But before we leave, I would like everyone to maybe open your videos and so we can take a little picture together. And then we can leave. So yeah, everyone, please open your videos. Maybe you can remove my spotlight, no? All right, perfect. I'll take a picture, yeah? 1, 2. All right, we'll do one more.
Long live people struggle.
Long live international solidarity. Long live the people.
Long live international solidarity.
Long
Down
live
with
international
imperialism.
solidarity.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It was a really successful webinar. I hope to see you all in the next upcoming events. Thank you so much. See you all there.
See ya.
Hidup buruh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hidup buruh.
Alex.